when I recruit somebody and their boss tells them they should do it because it's good for them, that's a good leader. How do you POACH-PROOF your team? And I'll tell you the simple answer. It's not rocket science. You find out what the people report to you, what are their personal and professional goals are, and help them achieve them. Both of them, not just professionally, but personally. I'm not going to tell you it's all about growth and numbers. I think that happens when you are faithful to your responsibilities and when you treat everyone from the chief of the department to the orderly with respect and honor, and when you just do the right thing, whether you know it or not, you are going to leave a legacy.
Drue De Angelis, thanks for coming down today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You have your hands in a lot in the medtech space, so I'll do my best to introduce you. I think just going through your LinkedIn here. So you're the managing partner at the DeAngelis Group, which is an executive search firm, co-founder and chairman of Surgio Health, member of the board of directors for Apex Biologics, founder and president of the Phoenix MedTech Consortium, executive director of the International Retained Search Association, co-founder and editor of OrthoSpine News, and co-founder of OrthoSpine Partners. And previous to all that, you were the branch manager for Stryker, and I believe you started with Zimmer as a sales rep. So
I did.
Thanks for coming on today. Why don't we just start by maybe walking me through your career path, you know, where you started, why you started in medical sales, and what you're up to today.
Yeah, thank you. Fresh out of college, I started selling for Zimmer. And at that time, it was a full bag. So, all the different divisions, arthroscopy, power, wound drains, joints, everything you can imagine. It was a 4-inch thick catalog.
Yeah.
And so I sold for just under 10 years with Zimmer in 3 different states, ending here in Arizona for about 4 years, I think. And then Stryker came at me pretty aggressively to recruit me to start their branch in Arizona. And at the time, they just had one sales rep. They weren't selling much. And so, as an individual contributor sales rep who had 5 hospitals, I sold more in my 5 hospitals than they sold in the whole state.
Wow.
So I thought, even I can't mess this up.
Yeah.
So I took that job and was there for 3 years, built a team. Then, as you may remember, we acquired Halmedica.
Mm-hmm.
And so we integrated the 2 teams. And then a year after that, I ended up leaving the company and starting my own search firm. So that was in 2000.
And so going on 22 years
Yep.
in the executive search space.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit before. I'm very naive when it comes to that space. I don't know much about it. So why don't you educate me on executive search, what exactly you do? You're talking about contingency search versus retained search. What does that mean? And how do you help companies out?
Yeah, so first of all, the reason I got into search, after 13 years in orthopedics was just wanting to do something on my own, do something where I wasn't depending upon another company. And when I sort of sat back and evaluated, I had job offers to do kind of what I've been doing, and I wanted to do something different. And when I looked at kind of my skill set and what was important to me, people have always been the most important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to be in a role where I could leverage my just passion for people.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved helping companies grow, and I did it as kind of an individual contributor and then as a manager, and then now I do it through another means, which is search.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started 22 years ago, really not understanding it, I just started 95% of the market is what's called contingency search. And that's when you get an agreement with a company that says, hey, if you bring us a candidate and we hire them, then we'll pay you a fee.
Mm-hmm.
So that's agreed upon. And as I did that for the first couple of years, I started to see some real flaws in it, and where I was incentivized to help people get hired rather than really vet them and screen them on behalf of my client. And I started to notice another thing, that the really hard to get people, I couldn't get them because they don't interview the same way that someone who's hungry and needs a new job. They don't interview the same.
Yeah.
They're much more in the back, sitting back in their chair. And the people who clients tend to like are the ones that come in there really charging and really trying to get the job, which are people who either need a job because they're unemployed or they're checked out of their job for any variety of reasons. But the problem is their motivation is all wrong. You get someone who's either trying to fill a need because they lost their salary or their income has gone away, or they're about to lose their job or whatever. They hate their boss. Whatever it is, their motivation is not based upon the opportunity, but it's based upon their need.
Right.
And that's puts my client in a vulnerable position, because it tends to be a soft landing. And once they get into that role, then they have the flexibility and to be able to start looking for a better fit. And so I started to see some repeating sort of situations where I would place somebody, and then 3-6 months later they're gone.
Yeah.
And so I had a bit of a crisis, and I nearly got out of the industry altogether. And then I talked to an old sage in the industry and told him why, and he said, it's not search that's wrong, it's you. You're doing it wrong. And he said the only way to do it is to be properly aligned with your client, to where what you both want is the same thing. It's to find the absolute highest caliber individual who can execute on the challenge and the role. And so it really is a complete paradigm change.
Right.
From, I noticed all those biases that I, as a contingency recruiter, was creating to try to get paid. And then we just, now we're aligned, because what I want to do is eliminate bias. I want to help find the absolute highest caliber of talent in such a way, but those people, they're not actively looking.
Right.
So that means that we enter into what's called an exploratory conversation, where my client is selling them rather than them coming in and selling my client, because they're not going to.
Yeah.
So there's woo, and there's a whole complete different process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of my favorite books is The Talent War.
Oh, yeah.
And they talk about, I think, filling a butts in seat mentality versus talent, and I think that's kind of what you're touching on.
That's a great book.
Yeah, contingency is you feel that, and maybe it's not the best fit, and then you move on. And so, I think, and there's a lot to that, and so. And we were talking about this before too, there's different skills that people need to have if you're a sales rep, if you're a sales leader, if you're an executive, VP, CEO. So how do you, what sort of talent do you work with? How do you identify talent?
So in my practice, I work at VP level and C level. So that would be a VP of sales or marketing or quality or regulatory or R&D. So that's kind of the cutoff for me. And I have an associate who kind of works at the AVP and director level. But the point I think that is important to distinguish is that whether everybody's kind of looking to advance in their career. And so what happens is, I started as an individual contributor with Zimmer. I did it for 10 years. And when Stryker came after me and I was weighing whether or not to do it, a good friend of mine, and I were talking, and I said, I've had 10 years of experience. And he said, do you really, Drew? Do you have 10 years of experience, or would it be safe to say that you have 1 year of experience 10 times? And so that was what kept me up at night, thinking through my decision. And the reality is when you go from an individual contributor, and not everybody, but a lot of people want to make that move, but we don't really know what we're in for. And you know this now as a distributor.
100%. I jumped from sales rep to distributor without any leadership training and
Yeah.
just kind of been figuring it out as I go along.
That's right.
You know?
And as did I. And there were a lot of hard lessons that were learned. But the point is that each rung in the ladder requires a different skill set.
Mm-hmm.
So sales rep, I think, they're critical. They're essential people for success. But what they don't understand is that their job is really quite simple.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you make the transition from an individual contributor, really whether you're in sales or you're in marketing or in R&D or quality, regulatory, whatever it is, you're an individual contributor. You're responsible for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? When you make that transition to manager, it's a different skill set because you're no longer successful through your own good and your own effort, but you're now successful through the individual efforts of other people.
Right.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
That's an adjustment. And there's a different skill set. So the same thing is exactly true when you go from manager to director.
Mm-hmm.
Because now, instead of being responsible for individual contributors, you're now responsible for managers who are managing individual contributors. So that alone is a new skill set that a manager has to develop.
Right.
And there's different metrics, there's different means. And the same is true as you go to the VP level. Now a VP, of course, is going to manage directors who are managing managers who manage individual contributors. So you want to talk about real complication, you go to the next level. You go to a president.
Yeah.
Because a president now takes what he or she used to have, which might be that one discipline or area, whether it's R&D, marketing, and maybe they had two. Maybe they had sales and marketing, maybe they had quality and regulatory, but now they've got all of them wrapped up under them. And that's a huge, steep curve to learn. And so I think that most companies do not develop their people adequately to take on those challenges in the new roles. And also the other interesting thing is a lot of people get a promotion by changing companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that happens, the new company didn't have a chance to prepare them. So there's a huge risk, there's a gamble that those companies take that they're going to be able to step into that role and perform at a particular level. So there's a lot of learning. And I think, to your point, what we were talking about earlier, it really is incumbent upon an individual to develop, take responsibility for their own professional development.
Mm-hmm.
Through books, through mentors, whatever means necessary, start to learn more about how to be effective, not just where you are, because that's important, but once you're effective and you have mastery over your domain,
Mm-hmm.
you really need to study and get equipped for the next step.
Yeah. No, you said a lot there. And, so you mentioned that you deal primarily with VP level and above.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what sort of advice or what sort of skills do you think are critical for maybe somebody looking to become a VP or, move from a VP to a C-level position, especially, in 2022 with so much interaction happening online through social media, LinkedIn, it's a different skill set now than it was, 20 years ago. So what advice do you have for those sort of people?
Well, I think, I really think it comes down to the objective of the company that they are in or that they're going to, because really it comes down to what are the challenges? What are the difficulties? What is the company trying to achieve? Because they're not all the same. They all have, a little nuance here or there or everybody wants to grow, but how they get there isn't always the same.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the challenges they face are different. So really getting in, and this is part of what I do in the assessment period, is really understanding where they're at, what's their current culture, where are the big challenges, what is the most difficult element or aspect of that role that I'm trying to fill, because you really need to make a fit. You need to find the right person who can deliver
Mm-hmm.
on the heavy lifting that's right before them. And it depends on the size and stage, because quite honestly, each stage of a company requires a different skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And so a CEO of a company from, say, 0 to 10 million is totally one thing. And then to take that company from 10 to 50, it's a different skill set. And very often that first CEO can take them only so far, and then they hit a wall. And they can augment by hiring other people to support them, and those are the good ones who are able to figure that out, and they might be able to stay around to get the company to 50 or even 100 million. And there's some examples of that, but typically that doesn't happen. Typically they hit the wall, and then the board looks to bring in someone who has scaled a company from, let's say, 10 to 50 million or 75 or 100. And then it's a different skill set altogether to go from 50 or 100 to 500.
Right.
So really understanding what is the stage, what is the challenge, and then finding the right person based upon their prior experience. And what's a lot of companies, I think you de-risk the hire by finding someone who's done it before. But then do you have an adequate value proposition to attract that person?
Yeah.
Because if it's a lateral move, how do we engage them? How do we entice them? So there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah. I want to talk about, from a company's perspective, employee value proposition, and I think you called it the 5 C's.
No, it's not 5 C's. You're thinking of the 3 C's, which is a different thing.
Yeah.
This is there's 5 elements of compensation.
Yeah. And
So the value proposition that a company has, and this is where a lot of misalignment happens. So if you figure we want to hire this rock star VP from whatever company who's done this, and this, well, that's great. You want that. Can you attract that? Do you have an adequate value proposition? And a lot of times companies think, well, sure, we're going to pay them this much. Well, that's great. Compensation, though, isn't just money. There's really 5 elements of compensation. And the first one, and they can do them in any order, but one of them is culture. What is your current culture? And it's important to know what the current culture is, because cultures reflect leadership. And you think maybe bringing in somebody, unless it's a CEO, to change culture, the problem is the embedded current CEO, if they're in that role, culture isn't likely to change that rapidly or dramatically. So culture is important. And again, if you're looking for a change agent, for anybody but a CEO, it's a slog. It's hard to do because that culture reflects leadership. So culture is a huge point, and you have to consider that. Another one is innovation. Are you innovating? Or are you just me too through and through? It's hard to attract people to just me too. And if you're not innovating, as Michael Crow, the president of ASU here in Arizona would say, is if you're not innovating, you're dying. So do you have innovation? Are you creative as a company? Are you out there developing new technologies? So that's another draw. That's part of your value proposition, or compensation. Really is five things. The other one is it a growth opportunity? Are you developing, do people get to do things that are exciting and different and that challenge them?
Yeah.
So that's part of it too. Another one is equity. You're giving them equity, and is it a significant enough equity to attract that person? And do they get to participate in the future event, whatever it may be, whether it's an IPO or an exit? And then the last one is cash. And I leave that last because if it's first on anybody's mind, then I think it's a huge red flag to me. In terms of the motivation for an individual prospect looking for, who we're trying to pull into a company. So those are the 5 areas of compensation that a company has to look at before they decide who they want, because they might have to adjust some of that to figure out, either we have to do something to make our value proposition sweeter, or we might have to ratchet back our expectations of who, in terms of talent, who we can attract.
Yeah. No, that's I love that. So one thing I want to kind of key in on is you mentioned innovation has to be part of the value proposition. So for you in the med tech space right now, what are some of the most interesting technologies or companies? Who are the innovators out there right now that you're excited about?
Well, what's fascinating to me is how Big Co can't innovate anymore. I was talking to somebody recently in the search that I'm doing who was at K2M. And K2M was an innovation machine, and they've just created tons of products.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then Stryker acquires them, and so in the last 18 months, they've launched one new product. And so that individual was pretty irritated. Maybe that's an overstatement. Maybe he was just disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And it left an opening for me to introduce another opportunity to him. So big companies, they can't tolerate the risk of innovation. It's too ambiguous. It's too risky.
Right.
And so an individual in a big company is managing their career in that organization. And so taking too many risks can affect their growth trajectory. So they can't take the chance that they fail. So you look at all the big companies, how do they innovate? They don't.
They acquire. Right. Yeah.
So all the innovation is coming out of small companies. It's coming out of very small startups. And there's a lot of exciting things going on in there. I think the digital space is very exciting still, whether it's imaging or preoperative planning or tying them in together into robotics or VR or whatever, AR. Those are all really cool technologies. They just have to be practical.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's still figuring itself out.
Yeah, one space that is very interesting and kind of the topic of a lot of debate is the convergence between spine surgery and interventional pain management. I don't know if you have much experience in that space. What are your thoughts on that? Because there's spine surgeons saying and potentially rightfully so, saying, hey, interventional pain management, you should not be doing these procedures because you're not trained on it.
Right.
And interventional pain management saying, well, we're more capable with smaller needles and access points. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on all that.
So my understanding of that is that it's somewhat driven by reimbursement, because the pain docs are not used to the big reimbursement. So they're okay doing a bunch of cases that don't pay as well. And quite frankly, whether it's the ISP space, that kind of kicked to them when reimbursement suffered. So I think that it's a little bit interesting to see some more aggressive pain docs doing some stuff that they weren't trained on. I think that's the big concern.
Right.
Is if they didn't have any training, just doing a cadaver might not be adequate to go to the extent that you're doing live patients.
Right.
But I think if they start getting trained in their residency programs and fellowships, I think it could change.
Yeah. So moving into Surgio Health.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What is Surgio? What do you do?
Yeah, so we started Surgio probably 6 years ago, really as a solution for distributors to track inventory. And it's a really slick way of knowing where your sets are, and you can bill through it, and you track your assets. So as a distributor, it was kind of a nice way to take your shop up to the digital kind of world. As we started doing that, we ended up signing up a manufacturer that now uses it for their national loaner program. And so that was going really well. And then we had a couple of spine surgeon friends, look at it and advise us that we were kind of missing the biggest market, which is the hospitals, because they needed it. So we ended up meeting with a hospital group that was an innovator in themselves, and Surgio Health. They're in Denver, and they liked it, and they saw the vision. They have a really very forward-thinking VP of supply chain and operations at the time, and so they saw the vision. And so what we started with was just simply a means of bringing in the trays and having, instead of them just delivering them when they could, even though they had rules about, hey, you got to bring them in 24 hours or whatever it was, there was no means of measuring that. And there was also no way to know who dropped it off And was it inspected?
Mm-hmm.
Is there bioburden in it? Is there broken equipment in it? Or is it all in working order? So the hospital has no way of validating that. It shows up and you find out the rep says, hey, that day, hey, there's an instrument missing. Can I get a PO? Well, it's kind of been no questions asked.
Right.
Here's your PO up to $500. So they saw that they could bring some accountability to that. They didn't realize what it could mean for them. So we started implementing it in a bunch of hospitals. And then one day, you may have read about it a number of years ago, one of their hospitals had a never event. They had to send out 4,000 letters to patients saying you may or may not have been exposed to HIV and Hep C. It actually was on all the news channels. It was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
CMS shut them down. JCO stripped them of their certification. They had to tear all their equipment, open it up, washer, sterilize, rewrap, and resterilize. Cost them a couple $1 million. And then they came to us and said, fix this. Okay, tons of confidence in us, and we brought in just brilliant minds. We didn't have the ability to do that, but we brought in the best and brightest who've solved it. And so JCO gave them conditional certification, which means we can drop in on you anytime and inspect you. And they did. They showed up, they inspected. One of the SPD guys walked them through the whole thing, and they said, this is best practices. We've never seen anything like it. You need to write a white paper. This is phenomenal. So what they've done is basically added a whole instrument tracking piece to not just the trays that come in on loan, but also the hospital-owned inventory. So it's a pretty phenomenal platform, and we're in, I think, 30-plus hospitals currently, and it's growing pretty fast.
Yeah, it really blows my mind how much goes into a sterile processing department. I had a director of SPD come down here and kind of walk me through from A to Z, everything that it takes to sterilize
Mm-hmm.
equipment for surgery. And there's so much that goes into it. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that are doing that job, they're doing it at a minimum wage level, yet they need to have continuing education credits
mm-hmm.
and meet these certain standards. And so it's really neat, and I think really important what you do at Surgio. So how would a distributor get signed up with Surgio, and how would it work?
Yeah, so our focus is in hospitals, and I'll tell you what you just said is so true. The lowest paid people in the hospital work in SPD, the same as the people who wash dishes in the cafeteria.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, the SPD is like the central nervous system to the profit center, which is the OR. It's so critical that they are well trained and that they understand the importance of each step in the process. So what we did at Surgio, because you may know this too, is when they hire someone in SPD, they typically give them a 3-ring binder for training, and they proctor somebody for a couple of days, and next thing you know, they're going. So part of Surgio required that we created a learning management system to be able to measure their proficiency in an objective way. So they have to log into that, and they get trained and take quizzes, and so they know if someone is proficient, because that's really important that
mm-hmm.
they are proficient. So that has become kind of the main focus of Surgio. We still have a number of distributors, some large distributors
mm-hmm.
using it. So if a distributor had interest in Surgio, they could always contact Surgio and
mm-hmm.
sign up. It's pretty simple to do.
Yeah. Does it work from a kind of basic inventory management system level?
That's
and
right.
Does it have to tie to equipment that you drop off to have sterilized, or can it just tie to?
You can just use it as a standalone tool for you and your reps.
Okay.
And it allows you to keep a kind of a surgeon preference card. So when so-and-so does an ALIF, you know exactly what instruments need to be in the trays. And every little preference that so that if someone's covering for somebody else, they don't go in blind.
Right.
They know exactly what's needed.
Yeah. I'm going to have to dive into that because, going back to being an individual contributor to, a sales organization leader, there's different skills and things that you need to, and one of them for me is inventory management.
Right.
It's such a important process, but you have to have it down right,
And there's there's a lot at risk.
Yeah.
So you don't want to mess it up.
Yeah. So how has, executive search, how has that sort of evolved and changed over the last 20 years? Going back to that.
I don't know if it has. I think if I look at objectively, the only thing that's really happened is the digital. It used to be that every firm had their database, and I used to have a huge database. And now, because of LinkedIn, finding people is easy.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's engaging the talent, the really cream of the crop. That's the difficult part, and making sure that you can you bring in the right people with the truth and not an inflated picture, such that, as I was saying earlier, they get disillusioned in that role, because you can sell a lot, and if it's not the truth, you're really not helping yourself. And so the wooing part and the vetting part is critical, because sometimes, especially when you get an exciting opportunity, one that a lot of people are going to want, and so now you go out to the market with that, and you have to really steward it in such a way that just because they want it and they're great communicators and all these things, you have to be objective, and you have to be able to tell them. And I just had a conversation like this the other day with a chief commercial officer of a company who, he doesn't fit the thesis. In his mind, he did, and he argued, but I had to just say, this is here's where you don't measure up. And he gave me all the reasons he did, and I said, well, that's not enough. That doesn't meet the threshold. So it's really a stewardship issue. Yeah. Of measuring and vetting, and not, a lot of people are really good at selling themselves.
Right.
So when you have a really sexy opportunity, you've got to really be discerning. It takes a ton of discernment.
Yeah. One thing that is kind of coming to my mind right now is executive presence. What makes a good sales executive, a sales leader, a VP, in your mind, what are some of the kind of must-have critical qualities?
Well, to be a good leader, you have to have people who willingly follow. And I know a lot of people who are VPs of sales or chief commercial officers, and they have people reporting to them. They don't have people following. You have to have someone who commands people in a way that is effective, but that people follow them willingly because they trust them. And it takes a rare leader who can instill the kind of loyalty and confidence in their leadership, where people will, you've heard the phrase, run through walls for you, that kind of thing. And I meet a lot of guys who have a lot of that, but they know the market, they know the KOLs, they know the distributors, but are people following them? Will people follow them through in battle? Will they go at it? Will they follow them to the company? Will they go with them? Will people? And a lot of times when I place somebody in a VP a sales role or in a chief commercial officer, they're getting calls immediately. Take me with you. Okay, so that is kind of the to me that's true leadership.
Right.
People wanting to follow you.
Yeah, and I think especially what's interesting in the med tech space, use the word loyalty. That's a difficult thing to chase, I think, because so many organizations, and maybe this is true just in general, it's all about the bottom line. It's all about the dollar, which of course, you need to be able to function as an organization. But I just see so many companies are so quick to dismiss somebody just for the sake of business, and I think it's short-term thinking.
Well, let me give you one other example of what I've seen that really shows somebody's that kind of leader. Okay, when I recruit somebody, and their boss tells them they should do it because it's good for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good leader. And that's someone that they trust. And I'll tell you, and I've done webinars on the very subject of how do you POACH-PROOF your team? And I'll tell you the simple answer. It's not rocket science. You find out what the people report to you, what are their personal and professional goals are, and help them achieve them. Both of them, not just professionally, but personally. And if you do those two things, they'll follow.
Yeah, it's
pretty
pretty simple.
I can't
you know?
recruit people who have leaders like that.
Right.
Because their loyalty, because they know that their boss cares about them and is helping them grow and achieve, and to not just professionally but holistically.
Right. Yeah, I'm probably going to butcher this, but what I tell my small team is my job is to make you so capable, so effective that other companies want to take you away from Optima Surgical.
Mm-hmm.
But my job is also to treat you so well and help develop you not only professionally but personally, like you said, that you want to stay with us. You know.
Yeah.
I think that's
well,
what
you're
it's all
ahead
about.
you're ahead of the game if you have that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, it's taken a long time to get to that point,
Well,
going from an individual contributor to what am I doing here? What did I just do? You know? So I know you're more focused on the VP level and C level, but going back to your individual contributor days as a sales rep, what advice do you have for maybe a sales rep looking to get into the medical sales space, or maybe a current medical sales rep looking to advance their career and hit President's Club and get into leadership? What advice do you have for those people?
Well, the advice I would give is probably not the same advice that I did. I never honestly considered whether or not I was at quota or over quota, and I managed to get 6 President's Club awards at Zimmer, and I wasn't eligible for the 10 years I was there. So, and I never was concerned about it, because all I was concerned about was making sure that I was doing my best to make sure my doctors were using the right product, that their cases were going well. I was making sure that they looked good and the outcomes were good. And wherever I saw opportunities to sell, obviously that's my job. So I'm trying to get my products in there. But I think that a lot of people are really mindful of growth, and they're driven by growth. And for me, that's not what I did. And I know that works, and certainly certain companies want to see this, competitive drive and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think it has to be just that. You don't have to just be driven by the numbers. You can be driven by excellence and honesty and integrity. And so my advice is, and in the industry as it's grown in many new companies, has been an influx of people from outside medical. I think it's lost some of that altruism and some of that ethical foundation that the industry was long known for. So, I'm not going to tell you, it's all about growth and numbers. I think that happens when you are faithful to your responsibilities, and when you treat everyone from the chief of the department to the orderly with respect and honor, and when you just do the right thing. And so it's not just a job, it's truly a lifestyle. And so when I was a rep, I was on call all the time. So we would take 2 cars to church, so that in case I got the call, I was able to hop in the car and leave my wife and 4 kids. And sometimes it was date night, and I had to go home and drop my wife off so I could run to the office, get a set, and run into the hospital. So I think people need to also count the costs if they want to get into medical sales, because certainly in the orthopedic space, it's you make a lot of sacrifices. And I've seen people who see the potential earning that can be achieved. They see it seems pretty cool, in the operating room, all these things that seem really sexy. Well, there's another side of it, and you know it well. It's schlepping trays in the middle of the night. It's doing a trauma case till 5 a.m. and not going home because you got a 7:30 case at the same hospital that next, in 2 hours or whatever. So the glamour wears off pretty quick.
Right.
But it's an exciting, dynamic industry, and I loved it.
Yeah.
And I still love it, but I'm doing it in a different way.
Right. No, you hit on a lot of good stuff there. I mean, that's what so I started this, training course for not only people looking to get into medical sales, but as a resource for people that are already in to develop their skills. And, what I tell people that are looking to get in, no course, nobody is should or I think can guarantee that taking a course you're going to get a job in medical sales. And like to your point, I don't think you should get into medical sales because you hear, oh, medical sales reps make X amount of money, it's great lifestyle and this and that. It, like you mentioned, there's a lot of grunt work involved. Running trays around, lifestyle change. I'm in the thick of it right now. I have 4 kids and trying to manage that and take care of customers and everything. So you hit on all of it. You have to want to do it. Number one, because it's going to be difficult, and you're going to have to be willing to put up with all the challenges. But to your point, if you take care of the surgeon, the entire healthcare team, take care of the patient, the rest will come, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you were saying. So there's so much I want to talk about with you. One thing is the Phoenix MedTech Consortium. What is that?
Yeah, well, Phoenix is one of the fastest growing cities in America. And when I say Phoenix, I mean the whole metro. So Scottsdale, Gilbert, Chandler, the whole Phoenix metro area. It's growing. It's one of the fastest in the nation. And we're getting a lot of transplants that are coming from, who are in medtech. But they're still hanging on to the relationships that they have elsewhere. And so it's hard for them to get connected in the valley here. And so I've had a vision to do it for a long time, but 2 years ago, my brilliant foresight saw to start it in about January of 2020. So we had our first meeting, about 34, 35 people there, and then COVID hit. So our next 3 or 4 meetings were all virtual. And after that, I was like, we need to take a hiatus. But what it is this. It's created with the intent to have people in medtech come together, share ideas, network, just learn about each other and what they're doing. We've got CEOs, we've got VPs of R&D, we got early stage, we got mid stage, and we've got investors who come, both angel and VC. And the idea is that if we can come together, and there's a lot of consultants, and help each other, then we can all kind of elevate one another. Mm-hmm. And the tagline we have is do well by doing good. Mm-hmm. And if we do good for one another and try to help each other, solve problems. And it may mean I just refer you to somebody. It may mean I might have the expertise to help guide. Right. But by doing that, it strengthens the medtech community here, and I just think it's a worthwhile endeavor. So I founded it, I funded it, and I have some really great partners in it, and some charter members who put a lot of money in to sort of help realize this vision, and so it's been a bit of a labor of love, but we're having our first in person in a couple of years coming up. So
very cool.
Yeah.
So how would somebody get involved with that?
If you're in medtech and you're in the Valley, just go to the phxmtc.org and sign up for the event on March 10th. It's a happy hour.
Very cool.
And we're having it at Surgio Health.
Oh, nice. I will definitely sign up for that.
Great.
And then the International Retained Search Association, you're the executive director of that.
Yes.
What is that?
So boutique search firms like mine across industries from around the world, we come together and we share ideas, best practices, commiserate. And so we have people from Italy, UK, Canada, the US. We've had them from Singapore and Netherlands, but with COVID, it's kind of made it really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, it's a way for us to make sure that we're accessing the best practices, the best and newest technologies, whether it's AI or some other means of just improving our practices and making them more efficient, more professional. Because boutiques like mine, whether irrespective of the industry, compete with Korn Ferry, Heidrick & Struggles, Spencer Stewart, Egon Zehnder. These are multinational, huge firms. And what's so fascinating is that you have these really very polished executives who may have been a CEO or a VP at a big company, and they go in the boardroom and they sell the search. And then they hand it off. When they win the search, they hand it off to these greenhorns that do the actual work. And so, the thing about boutiques is we do our own work.
Right.
And so I've done cleanup for them, for Zimmer Spine back in several years ago. They had 3 different firms try to do the search. And of course, Zimmer goes to a Russell Reynolds or a Korn Ferry, because that's just what you do.
Right.
Big companies, blue chip companies go to blue chip firms. Well, the problem is that they also have lockout. So a big firm like that will sell you that they can access this enormous market. But the problem is they also do work for Stryker, Smith & Nephew. So you're thinking you're getting the universe of candidates, but you're really not.
Interesting.
You're getting who they're allowed to call.
Right.
So I think it's been interesting to kind of see how that works, and been very successful cleaning up their messes.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we'll start wrapping this up, but a couple last questions. So, I talk a lot about investing in yourself and mentorship. Who are maybe some of your mentors early on that you kind of attribute your success to, and how are you, in addition to that, how are you investing in yourself today?
The first mentor, the guy that gave me the vision for joining Zimmer, was Al Larson, and he was a distributor in Santa Barbara. And he actually gave me a referral to the distributor in Colorado, and that's when I got my first job. So Al Larson remains to this day to be a good friend. Another one is I also met in my first job there is Dave Blue. Dave Blue is now with Genesis Innovation, Shoulder Innovations, just a marvelous human being. He was my competitor. He was a distributor for DePuy. He's just been a source of great encouragement and advice whenever I need it, and just a lovely man. And then from a kind of business and spiritual guide of mine is a guy named Larry Roberts of Roberts Business Group. An incredible friend, and just, has always been the guy that I would go to for really tough decisions that have potential impact that, could be generational.
Yeah.
So it's been huge to have that. And of course I have some dear friends that I rely upon now, that you have to have that, that inner circle, people who you can trust.
Absolutely.
And, so I definitely have them.
Yeah. Well, hey, Drue, I really appreciate your time. Before we leave, do you have any parting words of wisdom?
I guess I would say, that there's a lot of pressure to excel and to perform, but all of us have a legacy, and we have, whether you know it or not, you are going to leave a legacy. And so whether you have kids, in my case, I have 7 grandkids already. So don't put off. Your legacy starts now. And so be thinking about that. Be thinking about how you're living your life outside from work, and having a healthy life and work balance. And I always say God first, my wife second, then my kids, and then work. And so it's healthy priorities. And you know, I'm married for 34 years, and there were some challenging days and weeks and maybe even years, but I can tell you that it's critical that you keep that in order. Otherwise, you get sideways, and you know, a lot of people who have much different stories to tell. And so, you know, I think that it's very easy to get caught up in success. And I don't care how successful you are. If your family's not intact and healthy, none of that means anything.
I love that. Yeah, you're spot on. It's so true. Drue, thanks for coming down. I really enjoyed our conversation. I learned a ton. Hopefully our viewers learn a ton. I know they will. So really appreciate your time, and looking forward to another sit down sometime.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.